Okay, last week we covered the creation of the new European system, okay? We ended with the we started with the beginning of the 30 Years' War, and we went all the way to the end of the wars of Louis XIV. Now, and we took a stop there, okay? The wars of Louis XIV ended with the Treaty of Utrecht and a number of other treaties with the other sides, but the important treaty is the Treaty of Utrecht. And Utrecht is an important treaty because for the first time in a legal document, the exact concept of balance of power was included in the text. In the class, Dilara told us about the 7 Years' War declaration by Britain, and if you remember, one of the causes that Britain claimed was that essentially France is violating the balance of power. So this treaty is the first legal document in the history of the modern international system where this concept is actually written inside. Now, what is this balance of power about? Now, the concept was promoted by British thinkers and was claimed as a justification for the wars against Louis XIV and the need to balance Louis XIV. They said, we didn't fight this war because we had our own imperialist interest or political interest. We fought this war because we want to protect the freedom of Europe from this arrogant king with his ridiculous vanity. So they said in the treaty that now we built a new balance of power. So for the British, balance of power meant making sure that Louis XIV doesn't get control of the western bank of the Rhine River, remember the natural borders, and of Spain. Okay? Now, here's the interesting thing. Louis XIV himself claimed that he was fighting for a balance of power. Right? Now remember that map we saw at the end of the class when we were talking about the 30 Years' War, the one that wasn't well graphically presented and I had to play around. Now remember there was France in the middle. What was around France? We said, why does Richelieu care about what happens in the Holy Roman Empire? What was around France?
Catholics.
Huh?
Catholics.
Territories, right? Habsburg territories. Okay? Remember, the Holy Roman Empire was ruled by the Habsburg dynasty. Spain was ruled by the Habsburg dynasty. And essentially, Louis said, I fought the war of Spanish succession, first of all because, well, it's a God-given right for every European monarch to choose their successors. And Charles II of Spain, the monarch that had the serious genetical issues, had chosen my grandson as his successor. And at the same time, it doesn't make any sense for France to permit the Habsburg dynasty to become so powerful by controlling directly this time both Spain and the Austrian and Hungarian lands of the empire. So he himself presented himself as the defender of the balance of power. This is the reality about many so-called altruistic concepts in international relations. Back in the 18th, 19th century, it was the balance of power. Today, it is humanitarian concerns, liberty, and so on. They are used by governments to justify their policies in a way that can sell those policies to other countries, to persuade other countries that, you know what, we should support Louis, or we should support the British Whigs because balance of power is important. And what do they mean by balance of power? Essentially the idea that as long as each state in Europe pursues its national interests, in quotation marks, because one of the big questions of political science, one of the big questions of politics is who decides what a national interest is. But as long as they pursue their national interests and they oppose concentrations of force, European liberty, and by liberty here I have to be clear about what I mean, essentially the sovereignty of the states of Europe is promoted. Okay, for us, this idea that countries should be sovereign makes a lot of sense, for we have accepted and internalized it from propaganda that has lasted 200 years. Professors like me for the last 300 years have been teaching courses of IR and telling you guys, and you, all of you, oh, sovereignty is important, this is an anarchical international system, every country needs to be independent. Of course, every country's government, and especially the Turkish governments, both the old Kemalist regime and the current regime, have always talked about the importance for sovereign, national sovereignty and independence. Here's the thing, remember, this treaty is signed in 1713. The Treaty of Westphalia was signed in 1648. Only 50 years ago, a lot of the states that are covered by this treaty were essentially not sovereign, but part of the Holy Roman Empire and its idea of multiple layers of government, multiple sovereignties, no exclusivities. So this repetition is important because it essentially solidifies that there's no going back to the old Holy Roman Empire system. Okay, excellent, the war ends, there is peace. Well, peace is not just about signing peace treaties. You actually have to work for your peace. You know how they say you need to struggle and find your happiness, you gotta earn your happiness? It's kind of like that with peace in international relations, you gotta earn your peace. And there's peace, but many of the rivalries that had led to the wars of Louis XIV are still here. Now, let's see what are the main rivalries in the period between the end of the Wars of Spanish Succession and the beginning of a new war, the War of Austrian Succession. We still have the Bourbons of Spain this time, and another name, Philip plus his family, competing with the Habsburgs of Austria over control of Italy. Who will control the Kingdom of Naples? Who will control the Kingdom of Sicily? Who will control the Kingdom of Sardinia, the Duchy of Milan, and so on? At the same time, Bourbon France, Louis XV, and the Habsburgs are competing over Poland and the Holy Roman Empire. Poland. What about Poland? Well, remember, historically, Poland was a reliable ally of the Habsburg dynasty. If you remember from the 30 Years' War, the French had to somehow keep the Poles busy. Now, remember the special characteristic of Poland. Does anybody remember how kings are chosen in Poland? Talk between you if you don't remember, feel free. How were kings chosen in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth?
Aristocrats choose the
Yes, exactly. They were elected, okay? They were elected monarchs. And another name, just because you were king, your son doesn't necessarily have the right to become a king. They were elected monarchs. And that meant that the king could change. Once the old king died, a completely new regime could be established. So what the French did is they tried to remove Poland from Habsburg influence by promoting their own candidates for the Polish throne. And elections in Poland were not a free and fair affair. There's a lot of violence involved. At the same time, with the change of the Holy Roman Empire into a confederation, from a federation into essentially an alliance of sovereign states, the French see themselves more able to exert influence. And especially they are trying to win over Bavaria. Now, if you go back to our lecture on the 30 Years' War, Bavaria was a staunch ally of the Holy Roman Emperor in the 30 Years' War. They were the ones essentially founding the army of the Catholic League. If you remember, old man Papa Tilly, he was their general. So, during this era, Bavaria has become stronger and stronger and is starting to actually feel that it should have its own policy in Germany. And France can be a useful ally in this. Meantime, England and France are competing over North America And in the east, the Ottoman Empire is competing with Austria and Russia over control in the Ukraine, what is today Romania, and still Hungary. So these are the main rivalries. But as you can see, despite the changes that we have seen, the main story is still one about Bourbons and Habsburgs. Go back to the first course, go back to the second course. Remember, again and again, Bourbon, Habsburg, Bourbon, Habsburg, Bourbon, Habsburg. Now, with the end of the wars of Louis XIV, there was wariness in Britain with this continued rivalry with France, okay? There was a wariness in Britain with this continuous war. People came out of it with a demand for stability and peace. In the same time, in France, the new government, which was essentially a minority of the King Louis XIV, he was very young when he became king, so he was essentially having viceroys, was seeking peace, so the economy could rebuild. Two men took control of the situation. In Britain, we have Robert Walpole, who is the first prime minister in the history of England. Before this, there was no title as prime minister, okay? And on the other front, in France, we have a cardinal again, Cardinal de Fleury, who will be the chief minister of France. These two people would essentially head their countries about the same time, from 1721 to 1742, from 1723 to 1743. During these dual administrations, they would work really hard to manage international relations in Europe in a way so they can avoid a new French-English war. Okay? They try to essentially manage the balance of power by cooperating together and then imposing their results on the other powers. So we will get peace, right? And these are the strongest countries in Europe. Obviously, if they decide to make peace and order peace, everybody else is going to obey. I mean, remember, that's how the War of Spanish Succession ended. France and England made peace and then told everybody else, you're going to make peace. And they did. Well, there's a problem. And this problem is a woman. So there you go. We have another female character coming in. Philip II of Spain, Felipe V, actually, I think I made a correction there, is married to a remarkable, very demanding and very intelligent politician, Queen Elizabeth Farnese. And Elizabeth Farnese is Italian. She is one of the skiers of one of the great Italian aristocratic families, the Farneses. And Farnese has children. And not all of the children are going to become kings of Spain. So she wants to make sure that all of her children get accommodated in the future, that they have essentially a good job, a good patronymic. So she pushes her husband to demand that the lands that were given, the Spanish lands that were given to Austria and the new kingdom of Sardinia, Savoy in Italy. Remember, when the war ended, the agreement was Philip gets Spain and its colonies in America, and the Austrians and their allies get the rest of the Spanish Empire in Europe, which is essentially Italy and the Low Countries, what we call Belgium. Okay? So she says, husband, get something for our children. I want our children to be safe. And she tells him, why did you accept those puny Habsburgs and Sardinians to take away our lands? So she wants Italian lands from Austria and Sicily, Sardinia for Savoy. At the same time, this new Bourbon monarchy in Spain enacts a great reform project that rebuilds the economy of the Spanish Empire and, most importantly, creates a great navy. And the Spanish will use this navy to compete with the English over control of the Atlantic trade and colonies. So, one danger to this attempt to keep the peace is coming from Bourbon Spain. Surprisingly, the other danger is coming from the radical enemy of Bourbon Spain, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI. He also is not happy with the Utrecht settlement. Remember, he wanted to become king of Spain, and he still wants Spain. He wants northern Italy, he wants more of Hungary, and he wants control of Poland, and he also wants colonies. He's kind of jealous. The English have colonies, the Spanish have colonies. Why don't I, the Habsburg Emperor, have colonies? Sure, I don't really have any ports in the Atlantic, but that doesn't stop anybody. So he creates a colonial enterprise which comes in direct competition with the British. Now, from 1716 to 1718, Charles can't really bother the balance of power because he's busy fighting the Ottoman Empire. He is supporting Venice in the last Venetian-Ottoman war. And what happens is, well, the Venetians are crushed and they lose the Morea, and they're essentially expelled from the Balkan Peninsula, only keeping the Ionian Islands, from which I'm descended. And my family were actually colonial aristocracy from Venice, so living history. Then the French came and we lost everything. But for Austria, it went very well. Eugene of Savoy smashed the Ottoman armies in a number of large battles and was able to take most of Hungary under Austrian rule. So with the end of that war, Charles felt strong enough to now make his demands on the West. Let me show you these people. This is Elizabeth Farnese, Queen of Spain. In the Baroque period, being well-fed was considered a symbol of vitality and strength. Only poor people were skinny. So, you know, we have changed in our views of what is good to look like. This is Cardinal Alberione. He was the Prime Minister of Spain. So the French and the Spain liked the whole, let's have a cardinal. And this is Charles VI. He looks very angry and bitter because he couldn't become king of Spain. So what are these people doing? In 1718, Philip and the Spanish Bourbons take advantage of the end of the war with the Ottomans to attack the Savoyards. The Savoyards are the weakest of the countries that were happy with Utrecht, so they thought, it's not going to be hard, we're going to go in with our big fleet of 20 ships, bombard Sicily and Sardinia, and force Amadeus to accept the rule of Spain over Sicily and Sardinia. Well, unfortunately for them, France, the United Kingdom, Savoy, and the Netherlands go to war. So we have a war of the Quadruple Alliance in which Spain by itself fights almost all of the great European powers. This is a testament both to the foolishness of Spain's decision makers, but also to their ability to reform an almost destroyed country. Let me remind you, we got 5 years ago, 1713, Spain is a ruin. It's a country which people are fighting over to control, and yet in 5 years, those Bourbon monarchs are able to rebuild a country who's powerful enough to challenge almost all of Europe. Now, the war ends with essentially a victory for France and England, but it leaves both the Spanish and the Austrians unhappy because they don't like the idea of playing second fiddle is this one, to the conductors of international relations, which are the Spanish, the French and the English. So guess what happens? What do you think they do? Again, these guys hate each other. Charles VI hates Philip and the French Bourbons, and the Spanish Bourbons. The Spanish Bourbons hate Charles VI. But they both really dislike France and England. So what they do, in 1725, they ally. Despite making demands of each other, despite wishing to detach territory from each other, their hatred of the attempt of Walpole and Fleury to manage international relations leads them to put their differences aside and ally. Okay? They make an agreement to divide Italy, and Europe is divided between two great alliances. Okay? On the one hand, you have the Hanoverian alliance between Great Britain, France, the Dutch Republic, Hanover, Denmark, Sweden, okay? And on the other hand, you have the Treaty of Vienna, which connects Spain, Austria, and the Russian Empire. Boy, oh boy, oh boy, doesn't this look like an awesome war? Right? I mean, think about the war these guys with a leash, right? It's almost like going back to the good old days of the 30 Years' War, where France and England were allied. Well, what happens is that allies are not reliable. In 1727, with this treaty behind it, Spain decides that it can challenge Britain. And they want to challenge Britain over one very specific piece of territory. What is this? Which place is this? Yeah, Gibraltar, the rocks. Okay? In the War of Spanish Succession, the British had taken over it and were refusing to return back to Spain because they found out that this is a really cool rock to have. Kind of let us control the Mediterranean trade, which also means the gold trade and the goods trade from Africa and from Europe. Because remember, there's no Suez Canal back then. So if you wanted to trade from, let's say, the west coast or the east coast of Africa, which were very rich, to Europe, you had to go through here. So the Spanish attack trying to take this. And they go and they tell to their allies, the Austrians, okay, Austria, let's do this. Let's do this, man. We got the alliance. Let's do this. Time to do it. Let's do the Great War. And the Austrians are like, no, we don't think that this is useful. So we're going to stay out of it. At the same time, England goes to France and says, hey, buddy, how are you? Mon frère, mon ami, help me beat these Bourbons up. And the French go, yeah, okay, sure. Alliance forever, friendship forever, best buddies ever. So the Spanish come out of this defeated and angry. Because they're like, Austria, what the hell? I thought we hated those two. So what happens is the Spanish tell the Austrians, okay, we'll play that game. You don't want to be allied with us? Fine. We're going to go back to our best buddy and relative, France. And we're going to leave you isolated. And Charles is like, whoa, okay. What happened right now? I had a big alliance on my side, and now I'm by myself. My only ally is a half-crazy Russian empress. So he goes and says to the UK, yeah, you guys, you know, all those troubles we had in the past, please forgive me. Let's be friends. And the UK says, oh, sure, we can be friends. We just want you to do one tiny little thing. Oh, what's that? You know that company you created in order to get colonies? Yeah? Could you close it, please? And he does it. He closes the company down. He gives up on the idea of Habsburg colonies. So with the Treaty of Vienna, 1731, the UK and Austria become allies again. Now, it's important here. Why is it important? By this time, Walpole has passed out of power, and so has Fleury. New ministers have come to power, and the problem is that it seems that the period of cooperation between the two countries was really dependent on those two persons. And in reality, when you look to the actual interests of the elites and the governments, there were insurmountable problems. Okay? they had problems over colonies. Those were not resolved. Perhaps the British and the French were able to hash out an agreement about how to manage Europe, but they had not done something like that about how to manage the colonies, and importantly, their settler colonies in North America. French Canada, which is today Quebec and part of Canada, and what today is called the United States of America. Okay? The colonies were competing between them. Trappers and hunters from French Canada would kill Anglo hunters and trappers from America, and then the Americans will go and kill the French, and both will go back to the government and say, hey, mother country, why are you not protecting us? Why are you not protecting us? And this created a competition. At the same time, within Britain, there was a change in domestic politics. The Whigs, who had been the ardent supporters of the anti-French wars during Louis XIV, came back to power, and they started questioning, why is this alliance useful to us? Bourbon France is the threat to liberty. Bourbon France is the threat to our country. They are Bourbons. The Spanish are Bourbons, and they all protect those Jacobites, the old dynasty that had been overthrown by the Glorious Revolution. So what happens is, in 1733, that is not correct dates, I apologize, France finds itself at war with Austria over the question of Polish succession. In the war of Polish succession, what happened is the Polish king died, and there was an election over a new Polish king. And France supported one candidate, and on the other side, Austria and Russia supported another candidate. The election was not agreed, nobody accepted the results, and as a consequence, everybody asked for their allies to intervene. So war erupted. On the one side was Austria and Russia, ruled by Tsarina Anna, plus Prussia and Saxony, and on the other side was France, Spain, Savoy, and Sardinia in Italy. Now, the French did great in this war, okay? They were able to impose their preferred candidates in Poland, but most importantly, they were able to dominate Italy. The actual war was really fought over Italy. And out of it, the Bourbons of France became more powerful. But exactly because they did so well over the war, the British started to think that maybe it's not a good idea to support France. Now, it seemed like things will calm down in 1738 with the end of the War of Polish Succession. Unfortunately, there was a new succession problem. By the way, if you've noticed, our last two wars are always over who's going to succeed who. The War of Spanish Succession, the War of Polish Succession, and now we get to the new question. You see, Charles VI did not have a son. He had a daughter, Maria Theresia, or Maria Teresa. And here's the thing. Some of the Habsburg lands had laws that permitted a daughter to inherit the throne. Some of the Habsburg lands had Salic law. And Salic law prohibits inheritance of the throne by a woman. And the issue for Charles was, how can he get everybody within his empire to accept that Maria Teresa will become the ruler? Now, why doesn't he just order it and say, well, I'm the emperor, Maria Teresa will be the ruler? Why doesn't he just impose it? He's the emperor. Oh, remember, what's the Holy Roman Empire now? What kind of a government is it? Is it a unitary state? Like the Turkish Republic, let's say? Is it a federal state, like the United States of America? Or is it a confederation, like the European Union? Yeah, it's a confederation. And what does that mean in a confederation? It means that the sovereign, there's no sovereign. The emperor does not get to do what he wants. There are rules. Also, let's say he does try to impose his view. If you're unhappy with that, what would you do? You specifically, okay? You are magnates or aristocrats of 18th century Europe. The Holy Roman Emperor comes and tells you, well, you're going to be ruled by my daughter now. And you don't want it. What are your options?
To take him down.
To take him down, but he is the Holy Roman Emperor. He does rule a lot of land. You don't rule a lot of land. So what's your option? How do you defeat a powerful adversary when you are not powerful yourself?
Asking help from a foreigner.
Yes, exactly. You bring in another powerful adversary and you let him fight it out. So his problem is not just imposing it domestically, he has to make sure that anybody who resists within the empire, his ideas, will not find foreign support. So he tries to get all of the great powers and other powers of Europe to agree to what's called the pragmatic sanction. Okay? Which meant that essentially they agreed to recognize Maria Theresia as the inheritor of the Habsburg legacy. Now, how do you get a bunch of cynical, avaricious, gritty bastards, which is your average female and male ruler of Europe in this era? This is a cool era in the sense that there are as many queens and empresses important as there are emperors and kings. How do you get these people to give their promise? They're not going to stab you in the back. I mean, this is the equivalent of Turkey saying, we want Greece and Russia and America and everybody to recognize that, I don't know, the next president of Turkey is going to be Askeder. As an example. No political comment beyond that. How do you get them? Well, you buy them off, right? You give them stuff, and you promise them stuff in the hope that they will not try to get something else. So, first of all, he tries to buy Russia off. And how does he do it? Well, the Russians are like, you know what, we're not happy from our last war with the Ottomans. They won. And we think it's time that we get even with that. So we're going to go beat them up. Austria, could you help us? So he allies with Russia and participates in the Ottoman War of 1735-39, which goes great for Russia and is an absolute disaster for the Austrians. Okay, they lose major battles, sieges, their army is completely economically, logistically exhausted from it. He buys everybody else in various ways. Some he pays outright. Some he promises them, well, I'll give you this small duchy. And so on, and they all put their signatures, okay? So he's old now, and he's like, I have the piece of paper. My daughter will inherit me. No, no. The moment he dies, and Maria Theresia is declared his inheritor, all of those people who had signed those papers are like, I don't recognize my signature, or more clearly, I don't care. And the first one to do this is a new king, a young man. Both Maria Teresa and her opponent are very young people. They are younger than you when they become protagonists. His name is Frederick. He is the new king of Prussia, and he will be called Frederick II, and better known in the rest of history as Frederick the Great, or the Old Fritz, Alte Fritz. Okay? But now he's a young boy. And Frederick is greedy. Oh yeah. First of all, his father, with whom he had a very bad relationship, hated the Habsburgs. And he taught his son, hate the Habsburgs. Hate them, Freddie. I kind of hate you, father, but fine, I'll hate the Habsburgs as well, okay? Like an angry teenager. I hate you, father, but I'm going to prove I'm better than you, so I'm going to hate those Habsburgs more than you, okay? So what he does is, he goes up, and he invades Silesia. Silesia is an area that nowadays is in the border between the Czech Republic and Poland. It's part of Poland. But back then it was part of the Habsburg dynasty. And the thing about Silesia is Silesia is rich, has mines, a lot of iron and gold and silver, and the population is Protestant. So Frederick II, who is a Protestant ruler, takes it. He claims various weird ancient rights, but ultimately he says essentially, hey Maria, do you want to inherit the rest of the Habsburg patrimony? You have to recognize that I'll keep this nice piece for me. Okay? Literally, that's it. It's naked extortion. When he attacks Austria, he unleashes a veritable storm. As everybody who wanted a piece of the Habsburg Empire takes advantage of this and also attack it. France, Spain, Bavaria, and Savoy, all of them enemies of each other until recently, all become allies in this great feast that will be called the War of Austrian Succession. But Maria Theresa is not by herself. First of all, she herself is a very dynamic politician and a very capable one. She quickly does the right moves to rally support, especially among the powerful Hungarian magnates and elites, to support her. At the same time, the United Kingdom, the Dutch, and Russia, ruled by Tsarina Elizabeth, support Austria. And thus, from 1741 to 1748, Europe is encompassed in a great war. So here's Maria Theresa of Austria, Elizabeth II of Russia, here's Frederick II of Prussia, down here we have Louis XV of France, George II of the United Kingdom, and Felipe V of Spain. Frederick the Great was a chauvinist. He didn't like women. So you can probably understand how taxing it was to him to be opposed by an alliance dominated by two women. And this guy, he really was very much influenced by his lover, Madame de Pompadour. So, 3 women versus crazy young German guy. Now, this is the first global war. It's the first world war in a way. It's the first war in the new era which is fought almost everywhere in the world. In the West, the French and the Spanish fight the Dutch and the United Kingdom over control of the Austrian Low Countries. What we used to call Flanders, and nowadays we call Belgium. Okay? In Central Europe, France and Bavaria, together with Prussia, fight against Austria and the Holy Roman Empire over control of Bohemia, the Czech Republic, and Silesia. Indeed, during this war, for the only time since the start of the period we are covering in our class, the Holy Roman Empire's title of emperor was lost to the Habsburgs. The king, the Elector of Bavaria, was able to become Holy Roman Emperor for exactly 1 or 2 years. Okay? In Italy, Spain, the Kingdom of Naples, and Genoa, all of them Bourbons or Bourbon supporters, are fighting against Austria and Savoy, Sardinia over Naples, Sicily, Milan, and Genoa itself. In the east, Russia is fighting Sweden over the Baltic. Sweden is an ally of the French. The French give it money, subsidies, and get it to attack Russia in what's called the Hat War, because the party that led to the war in Sweden was literally called the Party of the Hats. And finally, globally, Spain and France fight the UK in the Indian subcontinent, in the Americas, the North Americas, and the South Americas. So as you can see, we are now entering the era of global wars. Okay? There's fighting here, here, and here. This is the first global war. There was some fighting in the oceans during the War of Spanish Succession, but this is the first war in which there are sustained attempts to keep military operations going on. The war goes on less or more in a seesaw fashion. Frederick actually leaves the war and re-enters it a couple of times in his attempts to get as much as he can out of it. It is completely, it's like Italy in the 19th century, as we're going to learn. Completely unreliable, but very successful. The war comes to an end when, at the Great Battle of Fontenoy, Marshal de Saxe, this guy, wins a great victory. You know, the British always go on, Waterloo, Waterloo, Waterloo. They always make fun of the French. The French are always defeated, they always raise flags. But Fontenoy is as great a victory as Waterloo. The Dutch-British army is decisively defeated, and Britain becomes negotiating for peace. In 1788, at Aix-la-Chapelle, which is a city in Germany, I believe today, a treaty is signed, which means that ends the war. Now, here are the results of the war, and then we're going to take a break. The quiz will be after the break, so make sure to come back. Maria Theresa keeps the Austrian hereditary lands but loses Silesia. So the price for her keeping the rest of the Austrian Habsburg Empire is to give one of the richest parts to that little bastard, Frederick II, who becomes very rich. Not only does Frederick keep Silesia, he also gains immense prestige in Germany, where he is presented and seen as the champion of the rights of the various princes against the imperial throne. The UK gains immense colonial territories from Spain and France. This is when the British Empire really comes to the fore, okay? This is when it becomes dominant slowly in the Americas and the Caribbean. And here is the most infuriating thing for people in France. Louis XV won the war in Europe, okay? He won the battles, but he decided he wanted to have a lenient peace in the hopes that by showing himself as a lenient winner, other countries will be willing to let him arbitrate their differences. He wanted to become essentially the middleman of Europe. So he gave up all the territories he won in return for some colonies and the hope that the rest of Europe will from now on say, France, we have a problem, can you mediate for us? This is why the French, after that peace, had a term called stupid-like peace. They would say this is stupid-like peace because they considered this peace so stupid. Sweden is decisively defeated and finally taken away from the satellite of France and becomes a satellite of Russia. Finally, Spain gets some Italian territories. Bourbon Spain and Habsburg Austria find a modus vivendi. This is important. Go back to our last 100 years of warfare, okay? 200 years of warfare. Italy has always been at the center of all the wars. Remember? There was war in Italy during the 30 Years' War. There was war in Italy during the period after the 30 Years' War, and especially during the Grand Alliance War, the War of Spanish Succession. There was war in Italy in the Quadruple War. There was war in Italy in the War of Polish Succession. There was war in Italy in the War of Austrian Succession. If we go before the time covered in this class, the Great Italian Wars had started and not stopped since the 1400s. Italy was at the center of the Bourbon-Habsburg rivalry. Italy was the apple over which they were fighting. And with this treaty, they finally find a division that they accept. And this is important. Between 1748 and 1792, for the next essentially close to 50 years, there's no more war in Italy. Italy will have peace for 40 years. It is the first region in Europe ever since the creation of the modern European system which gets a lasting peace. Here is the map. So, Spain over here, France over here. As you can see, the French do not get their natural borders. But what I want to see you carefully, here's Silesia. Okay, Silesia used to belong to the Austro-Hungarians, now it belongs to Brandenburg, Prussia. I want you to look over here in Russia. Russia from this war gained more territory in the Baltic, influence over Sweden, and down here you see this Circassia. This was an autonomous region, technically under the suzerainty of the Ottoman Empire, but really used by the Russians to slowly detach the Black Sea, as we're going to see later in the class, from the Ottoman Empire. Hungary has become solidly Austrian. Naples has a Bourbon king, but is a separate kingdom from Spain. Sardinia goes to Savoy, but Genoa remains independent. And over here, the Holy Roman Empire remains mosaic, like the cake. You can call mosaic cakes from now on house cakes, if you want. So, okay, let's take a break. Let me do that. 30 Years' War, major war in Central Europe. If you wrote 1618 to 1648, that's great. Mainly in Germany, over the question of who will dominate the Holy Roman Empire. Again, if you got 50% of that, you did great. And finally, King Louis XIV, French king, he launched a series of wars and was mainly responsible in the War of Spanish Succession. Okay? Now, if we're done with that, you see, not very hard questions. Let's continue. So, with the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, we get peace in Europe. But you guys don't believe that peace will finally come after all of these other pieces? You're right. Here's the problem. France and Britain became extremely dissatisfied over the resolution of colonial issues. As we said, the French really hated the peace and called, and even used the term, saying it's stupid like peace. They felt that Britain had gained too much power in the colonies. At the same time, colonial elites in Britain were unhappy with some of the territories that were returned to France as a reward for Louis XIV being so lenient in his peace terms. So, in 1754, war erupts in North America. If you've seen the movie The Last of the Mohicans, do you know the movie? Has the classical story.
I know the cartoon.
Well, there's also a cartoon that counts as well, but The Last of the Mohicans, whether the cartoon, the book, or the movie, all take place in this war, okay, this conflict. Austria is not happy with the rise of Prussia. They are not happy with the gain prestige and money and power by Frederick II. At the same time, Russia is not happy with the rise of Prussia. They consider Prussia as a threat to their interest in the Baltics and in Poland. At the same time, the United Kingdom also is not happy with the rise of Prussia. But unlike Russia and Austria, they don't believe they can resist Prussia and Germany. You see, back then, the United Kingdom has interest in the area of Hanover in Germany, because if you remember from our discussion in the Peace of Utrecht, the current dynasty that rules Britain are actually the old Hanoverian electors. So they are still Hanoverian electors and kings of the United Kingdom. So they have interest, and they're very much worried that Prussia is going to attack Hanover. But because England does not feel it has the land military might to defend Hanover, and because it lacks an ally in Europe with a major army, no good relations with Austria, no good relations with France, no good relations with Russia, it decides to cut a deal, to try and to make a grouping alliance with Russia called the Westminster Convention in 1756. Something massive happens now. The resolution of the Italian issue, we talked about it just before. The resolution of the question of the Austrian countries, Low Countries of Belgium, and the resolution that the imperial throne will remain in the hands of the Habsburg dynasty, essentially took out of the picture most of the reasons for the competition between the Bourbon and the Habsburg dynasties. So in 1756, in Versailles in France, Habsburg Austria and Bourbon France, the two main rivals of the last 200 years of international history in Europe, of European international politics, the two powers that are behind not just the major wars in Central Europe, but if you think about it, behind a lot of the Ottoman wars, the Russian, the Polish wars, the Swedish wars, through their support, patronage, and money, the two main enemies become allies. This event has remained to us in history as the diplomatic revolution, because the idea that Habsburg Austria and Bourbon France are going to put aside their differences and become allies was a revolution in European affairs. No one could contemplate it. The idea of England and France being allies was not crazy. The idea of Austria and Spain being allies was not crazy. That had happened. But the idea of France and Austria being allies, no one could have thought about it. And yet, the resolution of the issues over which they were divided led to this, the diplomatic revolution. With a French alliance and a Russian alliance in her pocket, Maria Theresa prepares for war with Prussia. Frederick II sees this. He knows that he will be attacked. So he takes the decision to first attack by launching a preventive war against Austria. He attacks Saxony, which is an Austrian ally, and overruns it. As a result, the so-called 7 Years' War in America, it's known as French and Indian War because, well, the Americans need their own names for everything, erupts. On one side is Russia under Empress Elizabeth, France under Louis XIV, but again guided by Madame de Pompadour, Austria under Maria Theresa, Spain, which enters a bit later, Sweden, which being a Russian satellite has no choice but to join, and Saxony, versus the United Kingdom and Prussia. Okay? The theaters are in Western Europe, over Hanover, in Central Europe, over Prussia and Silesia, in the Americas, and in India. This song pretty much covers the whole rationale for this war. So, let's take a small song break.
Hippericus rechts unter König und Herr, der Riesensoldaten allesamt ins Befehl. 200 Bataillons und 80.000 Patronen, und jeder Kenner geht mit Patronen. 200 Bataillons und 80.000 Patronen, und jeder Kenner geht mit Patronen. Ihr verfluchten Kerl sprach seine Majestät, dass ein Jäger
It's German singing, come on, what did you expect? Some nice melody? But it gives a good idea about the logic that people had, so the soldier says to his wife, oh, don't worry, my dear. Not every bullet in every cannonball finds a target. I'll be fine, just bad luck if you get killed. And also, classical German thinks, see, we pay our soldiers accurately. We arm them well, not like those French or those Swedes and everything. But the point remains, this guy is fighting all of these. Okay? Literally in this war in Europe, it is pretty much Prussia in blue, with some English help over here, and Portugal, being an ally of Britain, versus all of these green things. Okay? And they're also fighting North America. Here the British with the French. Down here the Portuguese with the Spanish. Brazil is a Portuguese colony, remember that. And over here, the French and their Indian allies, Hindu princes and Muslim princes, versus the British and their allies. Now, Frederick becomes the Great because he literally survives this. He is able to stay alive long enough that Tsarina Elizabeth, that woman, as he calls her, dies. Okay? And this happens in 1762. And this is called in German history the miracle of Brandenburg, because essentially by then Prussia was almost completely undone. The country was conquered. Most of its territory was under Russian rule. The Cossacks had actually entered Berlin and looted Frederick's palace. So pretty much Frederick was just running around with an army that was continuously getting destroyed. Sure, he was getting British money, but even the British were starting to be like, maybe we should start this. And when he's almost defeated and done, the old woman dies. Frederick gets us happy. Yes, miracle of Brandenburg. And what happens is, Tsarina Elizabeth has a son who becomes the Tsar, Peter III. Well, Peter III is a young man. Potentially he has homosexual preferences, which back then were considered illegal. Frederick is also supposed to have been homosexual, but we're not sure 100%. But let's just say he really admires Frederick, okay? He also is a hardcore militarist. he likes playing with toy soldiers, and he likes carving armies, and he really wants to be admired by his great hero, Frederick the Great. So he takes Russia out of the war and allies with Prussia, which makes the situation really bad for Austria and France. Meanwhile, in the continent, everything is going to hell for the French. In America, the British win great victories and take over Quebec. In India, the British defeat decisively the allies of the French and essentially destroy the French-Indian points. So by 1763, both France and England are exhausted, which means the money to continue the war is running out for the others. Since Austria, Prussia, and Russia kind of needed English gold and French gold to continue fighting. So peace comes, okay? With the treaties of Paris and Hubert-Duisburg, I probably said that incorrectly, the war ends. This is important. The termination of this conflict and the territorial distribution that follows it pretty much means peace in Europe for the next 30 years. Until 1792, there is no war in Western Europe. So the War of Austrian Succession builds a stable territorial distribution in Italy. That means that Italy faces no war for the next 40 years. And the War of the 70 Years' War, by the way, this is the first European war we have seen in which Italy is not a theater. So despite the fact that there's a major war happening, Italy's peace stands. This will give peace to Europe, to Western Europe for 30 years. But only for Western Europe. In Eastern Europe, things are very interesting. Peter III was married with a young German lady who took the Orthodox name Catherine, like my sister. Peter III was abusive. Supposedly he was actually hitting Katerina, beating her up, and she was afraid for her life. Peter III also was kind of hated by Russian elites because he really was too much into Frederick the Great. So Katerina takes advantage of that hatred, and with the help of her lovers and her own bravery, launches a coup d'etat, overthrows Peter III, puts him in prison, and becomes Empress of all Russias, the Russian Empress. You know Katerina as Catherine the Great. Catherine has a very clear foreign policy program, which is expansion, 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 expansion. She takes advantage of the exhaustion of France and England, and of the rivalry and competition between Prussia and Austria to divide her potential enemies and open the space to attack the country it has decided is the greatest target and the most opportune place for expansion. And that is the Ottoman Empire and Poland. She fights two Ottoman wars from 1768 to 1774 and from 1787 to 1792, which lead to the destruction of Ottoman power in the Black Sea. She takes control of Sevastopol and of the Black Sea and drives the Ottomans all the way back to the Caucasus. At the same time, she attacks Poland from 1768 to 1776 and 1792 and starts slowly destroying the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and eating that territory into Russia. She actually fosters a conflict between the new Emperor of Austria, Joseph II, who is the son of Maria Theresa, and Frederick II, and then his inheritor, who is his brother, since Frederick II never had children because, well, as I said, he hated women. He called his wife a fat whore. This is not the kind of person you want into your family. He also played the flute. And they had a war called the War of Bavarian Succession. Yes, another succession war. Only this time it wasn't really a war. There was no fighting. It's called the Potato War in Europe. You know why? The troops were so hungry that they started raiding all of the villages around them and trying to find potatoes to survive. There was no big battle. About 2,000 people died, all from starvation. But the point was, Joseph was busy playing loggerheads with Frederick. So when they were busy fighting each other, she was busy making her empire huge. She is a terrifying person. There's a good series called Young Catherine. Oh, for God's sake. Okay, now I can't show it, I'm sorry. The video, it has to be flashing better than everything. YouTube hates us. Now, that means Eastern Europe is at war. At the same time, despite the British victory, Britain is all powerful now in the world. This is where the British Empire really, you know, in the war of after succession, the British Empire was starting to get built. This is where it solidifies as a global empire. But it's at its moment of victory, treason happens. Exactly this. The war of 7 Years' War was a financial disaster for Britain. So after the war, quite naturally, the British government tried to make up the money that it lost. And it decided it's about time that those colonies in America pay their fair share for the war, especially since they gained the most out of the war. Now, it's true that in the Americas, most of the British troops that fought and bled for the war were actually colonial. Okay? So in a way, they did pay a price for the victory, the price in blood. But Britain also wanted them to pay the price in money. So it tried to raise taxes in North America. The American colonies refused to accept the legitimacy of the central government in London to raise their taxes and demanded to have their own parliament in the colonies that will have the authority to raise taxes. The British government refuses, and the colonies rebel, launching the War of American Independence or the American Revolution. France and Spain take advantage of this rebellion and support it in the hopes of weakening the British Empire and retaking some of the territory they lost. And you know what? They did well. They actually did well. Actually, the French Navy, which usually, if you know Napoleonic history, you are like, oh, they're always defeated. They actually won some major naval battles against the British Navy in this era. And French, Spanish, and American colonial armies defeated the British on America. At the same time, for the last time in its history, the Dutch Republic tried to regain some of its lost prestige and got into a war, the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War with the British, but was decisively defeated and ceased to be any kind of important naval power. The war ends, and the United States of America is declared. This is the first European-style state created as a sovereign independent state in another name, not as a colony, not as a protectorate, not as a weird exotic barbarian state, but as a European-style state in the Americas, outside of Europe. Okay? Also, it's the first colonial state that gains its independence. So I have to warn you, the Americans definitely did not want to point out that whole, anti-colonial revolutionary character when they were doing the revolution. Now, here's the thing. The result of this war is that France now becomes exhausted financially. The 7 Years' War bankrupted Britain and led to a new war. The American War of Independence bankrupts France. What do you think it's going to lead to? If you take the British example of bankruptcy, to a new war as well. And But what kind of a war? You said it very correctly. You will see to revolution. Before we go back to Western Europe, let's take a little more look at Catherine's the great, greedy adventure of I ate up your countries. If you play like computer games, Catherine the Great is kind of like that obnoxious player that wins like 95% out of 5 and really shoves it down your throat. Poland, if you remember, Poland, as we said, had elected kings. It was really a confederation between Lithuania and Poland, and powerful nobles ruled it. Now, ever since the War of Austrian Succession, Russian leaders considered control of the Baltic important, and they considered that Poland needs to become a Russian satellite. And what they did is they took advantage of the fact that there were Orthodox Christians and Muslims and Calvinists living in Poland, while the state was dominated by Catholics, and they were interfering for the defense of those minorities. So, if you know your Ottoman history, there's a lot of similarity there. You just have to change the denomination of the ruling class and the minorities. So, taking advantage of the instability created by these conflicts and of the fact that the Polish throne is elected, slowly, Russia started taking away territories from Poland. Now, why is it Austria, historically, the defender of Poland? Indeed, Austria owns Poland because in the Battle of Vienna in 1683, it was the Polish king, Jan Sobieski, and his hussars that charged together with Austrian troops and destroyed the Ottoman army. Okay? Why isn't Austria protecting Poland? Why is it letting Catherine go and start like, I'm bullying you. I'm bullying. Hey Austria, look, I'm bullying Poland. What are you going to do about it? Well, what Austria does about it is, let me come and kick it as well. Why? Well, because Austria is afraid of Prussia. Prussia also has an interest not to see Poland destroyed, but it's afraid of Austria. So what Catherine does is she plays their fears against each other, sometimes going to Prussia and saying, why yes, I would love to have an alliance with you against Austria. Sometimes going to Austria and saying, why yes, I would love to have an alliance against Prussia. Remember the good old days of the 7 Years' War. And essentially terrifying them so much that instead of doing what would be perhaps the smart thing, which is Prussia and Austria allying and blocking Russian expansion to Poland, they hope to group. Remember when I talked about grouping alliances being a bad idea? They hope to group Russia. So they tell Russia, fine, let us take territories out of Poland, but we will do it equally. So in the first partition, Prussia gets this, Austria gets this, Russia gets this. Then there is a second partition where Russia is like, I don't feel I got enough. Russia gets this, Austria gets this, Prussia gets this. Now think about this. Both of them are telling themselves, this is okay because we all get territory. But look at the size of the territory from Poland that Russia is taking, and look at the size of the territories they're getting. Does that feel balanced? This is the thing with grouping alliances. They are both afraid of Russia, but because they're afraid of each other more, they end up hoping to control Russia by being its ally. But instead, what Catherine does is take advantage of them to get everything she wants. So, let us take a step back. We have arrived at 1792, okay? Here's the situation of Europe before the event we call the French Revolution. The new emperor of Austria, Leopold II, is extremely worried about Russia. So is Prussia. Initially, what they try to do, especially Prussia, is to use the Ottomans and the Swedish to stop Russian expansion. You might not know this, But the second war of Catherine the Great with the Ottoman Empire was started by the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire declared war in order to defend Poland. The actual declaration was that the Ottoman Sultan cannot stand by and let Poland be destroyed and enter the war. They were egged on by promises of Prussian support and Austrian support. At the same time, Sweden also tried to regain its independence from being a satellite. These attempts failed. Russia defeats Sweden, Russia defeats the Ottomans. Then Austria decides something different. It decides to completely group with the Ottomans, and it allies with Russia in the Second Ottoman War. This also fails. Why? Because Russia gains a lot of territory, but Austria gains nothing. Then Prussia attempts to ally with the Ottomans in Poland, but it gets failed. Why? Because the Prussians are more afraid of Austria than Russia. So they prefer to let Russia become more powerful in the east than to somehow help Austria. So, using others to stop Russia fails. Grouping Russia fails. So, in 1792, Leopold II, the Austrian emperor, and his chief minister council come to an inescapable, terrifying conclusion for Austria. That if Austria does not stop Russian expansion, Austria will be the next Poland. And that the only way that's left for Austria to stop Russia is by Austria itself going to war with it. There's a similarity here with Richelieu. Remember, Richelieu tried to stop the Habsburgs first by supporting, remember everybody, the Palatinate, then the Danes, then the Swedes. And when it became clear that this is not going to work, Richelieu had no other choice but to take France into war. So Leopold II has come to the conclusion that Austria must fight Russia. And this is an existential war. He understands that if Austria goes to war with Russia, immediately Prussia will ally with Russia. And he will face a two-front war. And if he loses this war, in all likelihood, the Austrian Empire is done for. And yet, this war does not happen. Because just as it's about to happen, in France, there is a revolution. And Leopold's sister is the Queen of France. So whether he likes it or not, he has to care about it. This permits Catherine to finish off Poland with a third partition with Prussian support and to destroy the Ottomans. As a result, in the eve of the French Revolution, Catherine the Great is dominant in Eastern Europe. This is Europe in 1795. So over here you can see what has happened. These territories used to be under the influence or rule of the Ottoman Empire. This was the Khanate of Crimea. No more. Russia has now become a naval power in the Black Sea. Russian navies have arrived in the Mediterranean. More importantly, Georgia, over here, has now become a suzerain of the Russian Empire. In the north, Sweden has been defeated once more. Over here, look how huge Prussia has become. Okay, this is where it used to be the Polish. This is the old Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It's been devoured. The country that was Polish, Poland-Lithuania, created in 1515, has ceased to exist. Okay, as we said, in Eastern Europe, pretty much Catherine the Great is dominating. If you want to use today's concepts, she's pawning everybody. Okay? attempts by Austria to first group Russia or use other powers to stop for the Poles and the Ottomans fail, and attempts by Prussia to do the same fail. So pretty much Catherine dominates. Globally, something interesting happens. In India, the French have supported a number of Indian princes, Rajas and so on, both Muslim and Hindu, who are attempting to build European-style armies, who are attempting to essentially reform their countries so they can be able to resist the British. Some of them are anti-imperialist in the sense of opposing the British expansion. Others are themselves imperialists, trying to expand. You see, in India, until this era, the Mughal Empire, Muslim, Mongol descendant imperial dynasty, had ruled most of the continent. But what happened is, slowly, it started disintegrating. Partly under the support of foreign powers for internal rebels, partly under the support. So what happened is, the Indian subcontinent was becoming like Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. Various princes, warlords were essentially carving out their own states and trying to essentially become sovereign like the European countries. Unfortunately for these countries, they were defeated. In a series of 4 wars against the Sultanate of Mysore and 2 wars against the Hindu Marathas, the British were able to defeat the most likely future independent sovereign states in India, and thus the Indian subcontinent passed from one type of imperial hegemony, the Mughal one, to a new one, the British one. At the same time, in the Americas, despite the fact that England and Britain were not anymore competing there, Portugal and Spain, Portugal supported by Britain, were continuously fighting a number of small colonial, we would call them, wars in Brazil and in the Spanish colonies in the South Americas. In the meantime, that all of this is happening globally and in the West of Europe, in the Eastern Europe. In Western Europe, things were also not peaceful. There was no war, but there was revolution. And when I'm talking about revolution, I'm not talking about the French Revolution. Now, Joseph II, remember, was the son of Maria Theresa. And he also was the unfortunate person who tried to group Russia and ended up helping it become more powerful. But you see, Joseph II was a man who also admired Frederick the Great, not to the insane levels of Peter III. What he really admired was the efficiency of Frederick's army and of his bureaucratic system. And like Frederick, he read a lot of the Enlightenment philosophers like Voltaire, Leibniz, Kant, and so on. And Joseph started a process of rationalizing and making the Austrian Empire a centralized state like Prussia. Well, guess what? The old interests, ranging from nobles and the church down to cities and villages, were opposed to this reformation, which included things like giving Jews equal rights. Until then, Jews in the Austrian Empire were second-class citizens. Joseph II said, there is no such thing as a second-class citizen in my empire. He also said that there's no such thing as an unemployed person in my empire. And if somebody doesn't find a job, I will find them a job. Kind of like you should read if you want to learn a bit more about some proto-fascistic ideas. It's not the correct term, but some of his ideas about an organic community where everybody serves and has their place and work together towards a common goal, he kind of had this view. The thing is, especially in Flanders and Belgium, the city-states, the church, the burghers, the commoners, they had no intentions of sacrificing their particular interest and their old medieval rights to create a more united country. They didn't want to become Prussia. So they rebelled. And they were supported by Prussia. And it was a real rebellion. There was a lot of fighting. At the same time, as this rebellion is happening in Belgium, right next door, in the Republic of the Netherlands and the United Provinces, there is another rebellion. A movement called the Patriot Movement, which is essentially a liberal authoritarian movement, heavily influenced by the ideas of Rousseau, rebel against the old oligarchic Dutch Republic. It was a republic, but it wasn't a democracy. Power was controlled by a number of powerful mercantile houses and large landowners. So these liberal revolutionaries raced for revolution. And guess what happened? In this case, Prussia takes the side of the government and sends an army to crush the rebels. But what you can see here is that in two different places in Western Europe, Prussia, emboldened by its special relationship with Catherine the Great, is interfering. The common thread here is that both radical revolutionaries like the Patriots and conservatives like the Belgian revolt oppose enlightened absolutism, which is the idea that Joseph II puts forward. Now here's the thing. There is one country in Europe that is extremely unhappy about this Prussian activity. Right next door, okay? Belgium and the Netherlands. The Prussians are dominating. It's France. But France has a problem. It's poor. It's bankrupt. And as the old French concept used to go, pas l'argent, pas les Suisses. If you don't have money, you don't get Swiss mercenaries. So if you don't have money, you can't fight war. So when in 1787 Prussia invaded the Dutch Republic to put down the Patriot Revolt, the French king went forward and said, Prussia, stop this, or there will be war. And the Prussians were like, yeah. What money? Let me take out it. You got nothing. And he had to back down, which was a major loss of prestige, right next door to France, in an area which France considered part of its natural sphere of influence. The Prussians are going in and going, pff, 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 pff. Hey, look at me, France, I'm beating people up. What do you want to do? Poor France, we don't even have a good car. So, King Louis XVI, he needs money to fight the war against Prussia. Well, he can't get money anymore from lending because he's so heavily in debt. And because of the terrible state of the French economy, he cannot get any more loans. Also, most of the loans back then were used either by the British, the Rothschild German Jewish economic house, which was now sending a lot of money to Prussia, or by essentially the Dutch, who were in the middle of a civil war. So he has no choice. He needs to raise taxes. But you see, in France, as in most of medieval Europe, if you wanted to raise taxes on your aristocrats, you had to get their permission, which is where the British Parliament's power came from. So he needs new taxes, but to have new taxes, he has to give something to the aristocracy. And the aristocrats demand a parliament. For 150 years, no French parliament has been convened. Louis XIV finished that. So the aristocrats tell the king, sure, we're willing to pay money, but in return we want you to call a parliament. And in that parliament, we're going to push for some reforms we consider important for the good of France, meaning their class. Now, the aristocrats tell Louis, we want a parliament only of the aristocratic estate. Only of aristocrats. Louis decides that if he does that, he's done for. He will have to submit to the will of the aristocracy. The French royal power will go all the way back to the time before Richelieu. where powerful magnates rule the land. So he tells them, fine, we'll have a parliament, but you know what? Under the ancient rules, it has to be a parliament of all estates, which means the church has to be called in, which is one of the three estates, and the most important one, the burghers, the bourgeois, the middle class have to be called in. His hope was that he could use the commoners of the church votes to outvote the aristocracy. So he will get his taxes and at the same time avoid having to give everything up to the aristocrats. This is a momentous event. For 150 years, in France, the king stroked his foot down and everybody's scared to obey. Now was a chance for everyone. Church clergy, aristocrat. Now there was a chance for the commoners. And when we mean commoners, we don't mean the very, very poor, but we mean the urban classes to make new demands. To hold the king hostage and tell him, you want taxes and a war? Give us this right, or this right, or this right. So every one of these classes saw the Estates Generals as a chance to get stuff. For the aristocracy, they wanted to undo absolutism, the absolute power of the king, and strengthen their position in society. For example, among the things they wanted to ensure was that nobody who was not an aristocrat could serve in the army as an officer or in the bureaucracy as a bureaucrat. They wanted to essentially close off the state from the other classes. The middle classes were threatened by the nobility, by that golden nobility, because for a lot of them, working for the state was a way to make money. They also did not like absolutism. What they wanted was something like England, where in England it was the middle classes, the bourgeois, that were dominating parliament. So they wanted that. At the same time, the urban poor find their chance through specific middle class and aristocratic representatives to push for their own demands. And what they wanted is this. They wanted to return back to the communal property rights of the feudal era. In capitalism, you have private property rights, okay? Each one of us owns private property. In the feudal era, it's a mistake to think that everything belonged to the aristocrats. A lot of the things belong to the aristocrats, but a lot of things belong to communes. So while you, as a poor farmer, might not have your own land, you had rights to farm on the common communal land. And what had happened in France, just as in Britain, is slowly the church and the aristocracy and the bourgeois, they had taken away that common land from the communes and divided it into private property. And that meant that millions of poor farmers that used to survive by having a goat on the common land or tilling part of the common land, they were without any substance. So what did they do? They moved to the big cities to work in the new factories. But compared to what rights they had as members of the peasantry, they had nothing in the new big cities except from exploitation and starvation. So they wanted a return to those rights. And they wanted opposition to centralization of absolutism and capitalism. They saw centralized government, the end of the particular rights of the various regions and communes of France, as a threat. So they would like to turn that back. Now, the French Revolution is divided in a number of phases. The first phase is called the National Assembly. From 1789 to 1791. What happens is the king, the aristocracy, and the middle classes are all competing with each other. And what happens is the aristocracy and the middle classes in the end cut a deal. And what they do is they force the king to accept the constitution and give up his absolute power, okay? So in this phase, France becomes very close to England in a kind of government. There's a king, he has a lot of power, but the new legislative assembly which is voted by more broader elections than in England, has a lot of economic and political power, okay? The middle classes and the aristocracy would like the revolution to stop here. But there's a problem. This opening of the political system activates the urban poor, who with mob power in Paris make demands for further democratization, for further radicalization and for economic equality. They are joined by radical liberals who want to further undermine the monarchy, make the king essentially a figurehead. So at the same time, the aristocracy and the conservative liberals are trying, on one hand, kick the king in the constitution, on the other hand, kick the radicals outside, while the king is trying to use these guys' oppositions to regain his power. So it's a three-way fight. King versus conservative liberals and aristocrats versus radical liberals and the poor. Now here's the reality. Initially, no one cared that there was a revolution in France. Most of the other decision makers frankly considered the French state a joke and considered that King Louis is getting what he deserves. Indeed, neither Joseph II nor his brother Leopold II thought much of Louis XVI. There is an anecdotal story. I don't know if this is true, but I heard it in one of my own classes. Now, Louis was married to, what's the name of that? Maria Antoinette, who was a sister of these two guys, okay? And at one point, Joseph II visited Paris, and you know, Maria Antoinette and Louis have been married for a while and they don't have a child. And Joseph takes at some point Louis to the side and asks him, how's everything going in the you-know-what, Louis? Louis is a very pious person. What do you mean, you-know-what? Well, in the bed, you know, you have to get an heir. How's everything going there? And Louis says, well, we're trying. Okay, how are you trying? Well, you know, I get on the bed with my clothes, she gets next to me on the bed with her clothes, and then we touch hands. And this is probably propaganda anecdotal, but it's the idea that Louis was such a naive person in a way. Now, the Austrians, as we said, are worried about someone who is definitely not naive about sexual encounters, Catherine the Great. Russia does not care. Why? Because it's busy munching up Poland and the Ottoman Empire. Blah, 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 blah. I don't care about what's going next home. Prussia is happy about this. They're like, great, the French government is a joke, free hands in the Netherlands. We're going to beat up the patriots, we're going to create our own patronage system, and we are going to dominate the Northern Sea. That's what the Prussians think. Now, Prussia begins moving troops into the Netherlands and threatens to intervene against the legislative assembly. We already said that Prussia doesn't care about what's going on in France, so why will it do that? Because the goal is this. By creating the threat of war with France, they hope that Austria will have to take its attention away from Poland and worry about Belgium, which is an Austrian land. Okay? Because if Austria is busy with the French, Prussia can go and take part in the Russian gorging up of Poland. Now, Austria, in the end, goes for this, for two reasons. First of all, there is a real threat against the French royal family. The urban poor in mob violence sometimes almost lay their hands on the royal family. And as much as Leopold II doesn't care about Louis XVI, his sister is still the wife, he cares about his sister, and also as a monarch he cannot accept the population threatening the sanctity and life of the ruler. Louis might deserve becoming a figurehead king. He does not deserve being killed. That's the way of thinking. At the same time, they're worried that if they don't join the Prussians, and let the Prussians go free, the Prussians are going to do whatever they want and aggrandize themselves. So it's also a way of trying to group Prussia. So they make the Declaration of Pillnitz in 1791, which is not really a declaration that says we're going to overthrow the revolution. They say essentially, as long as the physical safety of the French king and his family are safe, we're not going to do anything. But if something happens to the French king and his family, there's going to be trouble. But here's what happens. French radicals, especially the guillotinists, take advantage of the Declaration of Pillnitz to present an image of the revolution in danger. So they are pushing for the war. At the same time, King Louis XVI joins them in pushing for the war. The king believes that the war will permit him to rally the people around him, that he can use the war to essentially persuade people that he is the leader, that he has a connection with the country. Okay? The radicals believe that the war will permit them to get rid of the conservatives and of the king. You know who opposed the war? The Jacobins and Robespierre. Robespierre, which we're going to see later on, who is associated with the French Revolution and its violence and everything, in 1792 voted against the war, against Austria. But Robespierre was not listened to. So on the one hand, King Louis gives his hand to the very people who want him dead, to declare war on Austria, because he hopes in a perverse version of a grouping alliance that the war will give him more power than to the people who want to take their hand. So who do you think is going to be right? King Louis or the radicals? This is a very appropriate reaction to King Louis' ideas. Yeah. Smart thinking, Louis. You see, the radicals take advantage of the war and some very stupid moves by the king and members of his families to declare the king a traitor and to cut off his head. This is what he got for his ideas.
Je meurs, innocent de tous les crimes dont on m'accuse. Je pardonne à ceux qui sont coupables de ma mort. Et je prie Dieu pour que le sang que vous allez répandre ne retombe jamais sur la France.
Louis is executed. Later on, his wife, Marie Antoinette, is going to be executed. There's a nice movie about Marie Antoinette that was done recently by the daughter of Francis Ford Coppola. I don't remember her name. I apologize for that. Shame on me. You should watch the movie. It's actually very good. End point is the execution of the king leads to the radicalization of the French Revolution and the radicalization of the international reaction to the French Revolution. Now, let me get something clear. This is not the first European king that dies. We already saw one European king lose his head. It was King Charles I of Britain. So this is not something new. But the British were considered kind of like weirdos over the sea, semi-barbarians back then. Well, this is one of the ancient monarchies of Europe. The most Catholic monarch of Europe, and his head is just cut off. Jacobites declare a republic, and the Gironist radicals plus the Jacobin radicals come to dominate it and start conflicting between them. The third phase of the French Revolution is called the Convention. It lasts for 2 years and is dominated by Robespierre and his Jacobins, who essentially established what is called the Terror, a period of extreme, hardcore revolutionary government characterized by mass executions, extrajudicial murders, and hardcore civil war in France. France is turned into a massive battlefield. At the same time, France goes to war with Austria, England, Spain, the Dutch Republic, Kingdom of Naples, Kingdom of Sardinia, Piedmont, Portugal, and Prussia. Pretty much everybody in Western Europe. And the new government does something new. It declares a levant en masse. Instead of relying on the old professional armies of volunteers or randomly selected conscripted people, it says everybody who's a man and who use weapons will now be put into the army. There was even an attempt by women to join up. The birth of modern feminism takes place during this period. And by the way, the modern feminists start killing each other during this period. The contemporary division between liberal feminists and radical feminists, it was there. Gironist women and Jacobin women will tear each other's hairs apart, kill each other, hunt each other, and denounce each other. All of our political conflicts birthed here. So the new French Republican government, with the terror, raises massive armies, millions of men, and uses this to defeat all of Europe. Now, what are the goals of the two sides? On the one side, you have the French radicals, initially Girondinists, later on Jacobins. And what they are seeking is to export the revolution to all of Europe, to make everybody in Europe free from the chains of oppression and tradition. At the same time, though, they want something very, very old-fashioned. They want the natural borders. Remember Louis XIV and his natural borders? I want the Rhine to be my border. They seek the same. Despite the revolutionary rhetoric, they're doing politics the old-fashioned way. We're almost done. What about the Allies? The Allies have no common goal. They're divided. For Austria, the goal is simple: survive. Since the French declared war on Austria and have decided that the Austrian Empire must be destroyed. For Prussia, the goal is again simple: keep the Austrians occupied in the West. The Prussians started this war, and yet all they did was fight one battle, which was not even a real battle, just an artillery duel, and then they said to the Austrians, "Good boy, good chap, you continue doing this. We're going to go back to the other side of the Rhine, okay? Because there's a place called Poland. The United Kingdom is hardcore. It wants regime change. It wants the overthrow of the revolution and the restoration of the Bourbon dynasty. Spain and the Italian states, like the Austrians, survive. They're on the path of this crazy state. These changes in warfare are radical. The levant en masse creates a massive conscript army. It requires new modes of army organization. The new French armies do not always win. Sometimes they're defeated by the old professional armies. But you know what? Who cares if you're defeated? You have 1 million men. You can lose 200,000 and you still outnumber your opponents. While those royal armies, at most they're 100,000 men. They lose one campaign, it's over for them. They can't be rebuilt. It takes many years to build those soldiers. And in this war, the war of the first coalition, and this is the last video we're going to watch, a new character enters into European history.
Clock is out and I want silence.
Number 24 pounds.
I'll start counting.
No. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Take your fannies, oilier the better. Cover your locks, leave them on. Don't get excited, you're not going. That's your shame. Daddy, is it true you saved the nation at Toulon? I'm afraid not. I was in the reserves.
Now, 53 seconds.
Going wrong. All 3 columns have turned in too early. We may have to commit the reserves.
Sir, the gin denominator hasn't...
They're flattering. God's sake. This is it, mate. Get my horse.
Sir, you could be court-martialed for this. What about your family, please, sir?
I've got no choice. Looks like history's made room for us after all. Hold your neck. Any of you don't feel like going? It's fine. I do. I'll take this sport alone, and destiny will be waiting. Shot will bounce off me. Cannonballs will swerve in fear. Not one of you needs to take this sport, but I absolutely insist you come with me and watch me take it. You will come with me and watch
Yes. In what class?
Come close. You're right. Glory is fleeting, but obscurity lasts forever.